What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We are continuing on our Birthright faction or domain review series here, and this is the first one up in the Heartlands, and so we might as well start with the biggest and the baddest here, and that is Avanil. So if you remember back in our Western Coast review, we got into Borroween, which really is sort of the major antagonist to Avanil, and put it in other terms for you guys, like more Game of Thrones type terms. Basically, these are the Lannisters to the Starks of the Borrowings, although don't read too much into that just because there's not that many similarities, and you shouldn't really think of them like that. But nonetheless, Avanil is sort of like one of the biggest domains. Certainly, in many ways, the most powerful and affluent, and that's where that kind of comparison comes into play a little bit. Whereas Borrowing's a little bit rougher around the edges and so on and so forth. But nonetheless, let's jump right in because Avanil is really at the center of so many things, not just for being in the Heartlands, but also where it's located, center of politics, and so on and so forth, and just the direct and indirect influence that Avanil can exert is massive. So if you're anywhere near Avanil, you certainly will have to contend with this domain in your affairs in some way, shape, or form. So let's jump right in. So this is another one of those that's definitely not available for PCs. It is overall a lawful neutral realm. It holds 9 provinces, although one of them, as it says here, Anuir, encompasses the city of Anuir, and he does not directly control the imperial capital, so that is still left vacant. Essentially, it's its own domain, but we'll come to that a little bit later in this Heartlands series here. So as you can see, pretty much most of the domain is fairly well settled. The Anuir province itself is a 7. We have Avarian at 3, Bahrain at 4, Kalnor at 5, Dalton at 5, with still a lot of magical potential left, was interesting there. Durien 4-1, and then some of the lesser settled ones, Nentril, Taliern, and Venelin, all 3-4s. As you might suspect, Avan controls all the law here. There's literally no room for anybody else, not that he would tolerate that for long anyway. The temple side is a little more interesting. We'll come into that in just a little bit. The guild side is also got a couple of contenders here and there. And then on the source side, basically, if you remember our series back from the Western Coast, so Harold Corian of Tagas, basically in exchange for Avanil getting to control things on the political side in Tagas, he gives Harold Corian access to basically running Avanil's magic. So let's jump right in here. So the law. Avan controls all the law in Avanil. No one even has a level 0 holding in the realm. And he also controls most of the law in Tagas, and even some in the Imperial City itself. So again, he is able to exert his influence in that domain, or that, I shouldn't say domain, that particular aspect, pretty much unquestioned there. The temple side. So the Western Imperial Temple of Halen controls nearly all of the religion in Avanil, although the Celestial Jewel of Sermier is establishing itself, and Avan controls the priests of the Western Temple. So again, he has ways to influence and control basically not just the politics, but everything else essentially that is happening in his domain, and even further abroad. The guild side. Aron Vamel, the governor of Mires, has a little bit to say here, although emphasizing, I think, a little bit, not much, as does Ariane Miralin, Duchess of Brosengay. However, the sizable balance is held by Parnian Anuvier Inier, fun name there. He's only a level 2 thief, very minor bloodline, lawful neutral himself, but he's basically under Avan's control, so basically he's Avan's sort of puppet guild master in that sense. And Avanil is going to be shrewd enough to play the other contenders off of each other anyway. So, again, when we say control or a little bit of influence, it's definitely a little bit, not that much. Okay, so then moving on the source side, as we said, in exchange for the law in the kingdom of Tagas, Avan controls Harold Corian, Count of Tagas, to control the magic of Avanil. Though other wizards have gathered influence in Avanil, Corian's power remains nearly absolute, and really essentially absolute there. So again, the province of Anuir itself is the only one where Corian doesn't, or is somewhat challenged, and then that's only just because there's 2 level 0s there, because there's not much potential left there in Anuir itself. So keeping that in mind, so here's where it gets massive, and again, other players wouldn't necessarily have access to this information, but you as the DM, so if you need to really present a threat to your players, or help them fall in line, here's again where Avanil is just blows every other domain out of the water. So just one-on-one, there's really not much that anyone is going to do to stand up to Avanil. Just have a straight-up fight. So if we take all the other factors out, just resources and military, certainly, at least on paper here, should easily defeat Borrowing, just has a much larger army. And Gore, the other sort of major military power, is, at least initially, a little bit lower, but could potentially, within a couple turns, basically create a larger army than Avanil, and that would be at least a pretty formidable fight there. But again, overall, I think Avanil's other resources, as we see here, Regency and Treasury, would, I think, let him outspend pretty much any competitor, or even several other competitors. So let's take a look here. So Regency generated 93 and has 110 accumulated. So that basically should allow him to do what he needs to as far as exerting his influence and spending extra regency and so on and so forth. Now, of course, it's not unlimited, but nonetheless, he should be able to get done what he needs to get done on that front as far as spending capital in that sense and getting his goals closer to fruition. But again, no one necessarily wants to see Avanil succeed, and that's what will at least keep, or should keep him in check somewhat, if your DM's running that effectively. The Treasury, though, massive 160 gold bars, plus tribute from vassals, right? So with tribute, probably bump that up to 170 or so. So that's really up to the DM to figure out how much he's really going to have there. But that's accumulated treasury, which is just bonkers. Even a lot of the other rulers who have like a physical domain and then run something like a church or guild or something like that, who typically might get up into like the 50 or 60 gold bar range, which is already a lot there. This, again, just blows so many things out of the water. So there's really, like, if you're gonna try and pick on Avanil as an opponent, like you better do some long-term planning and cultivate a serious set of alliances or something. Like, you're just reaching this level of resources on your own is going to be a pretty long-term task. But anyway, let's jump in here. The army of Avanil, as mighty as the kingdom's treasury, can support 25 units at a time. So much of that is spread throughout the domain and some nearby allies, but a core unit or two or more remains near the prince. So, but just at least initially here, right? He's got 3 units of archers, 2 artillerists, 3 cavalry, 6 infantry, 3 elite infantry, 4 units of knights, and 4 pikemen. So again, if need be, he could certainly create multiple armies within his overall army, sort of like task forces here to deal with things that might come his way. So again, if you're thinking about antagonizing him, just understand that he could certainly come out and deal with you if he felt like it. So he certainly got the treasury to basically raise, at least for a certain amount of time, another sizable army just to come in again, solve whatever problem might be coming his way. So Avan himself, whether you find yourself siding with him or seeing him as an opponent, he is also pretty formidable here. So he is a level 9 fighter, very major, or sorry, I shouldn't say major, but like a great bloodline to use the game's terms. But he's got one of the highest bloodlines out here at 70, and lawful neutral himself. So he not only runs his kingdom, but significant portions of other provinces as well. Though he inherited much from his father, Veladon Avan, he has managed to amass an even greater portion of wealth and power than any had dreamed possible. It did help that partial stewardship of the city of Anywhere itself also passed to him with the death of his father. And nonetheless, though, he capitalizes on any opportunity to expand his domain. So this is still a very ambitious regent here, and just one who is going to seek to gain as much influence and power as possible, which some of that sort of ambition, though, is what kind of makes people a little bit leery about supporting him as far as like being the next emperor of Anouir. So, and certainly Borrowing and some other domains certainly would have some things to say about that, as they also have some very valid claims to make there. So, one thing that's maybe working against him, though, is that he is already sort of in middle age. But nonetheless, he's still, his age hasn't slowed him down in that sense. So he seems well versed in the uses and abuses of power. And if you are ever going to exploit something against him, it could be those and trying to play those up. But again, if Avan comes to the realization that you're behind anything to besmirch his kingdom, you'll you'll see either overt or covert consequences of that. And again, when we get around to covering the Sword and Crown adventure module, where Avan and Borrowing feature quite extensively, that will really sort of help emphasize how these guys should be approached and treated, and how you'll have to interact with them in some point or another. So he strives for law and moderation in all things, but he, like the Archduke of Borroween, appears willing to sacrifice his compatriots to gain the Iron Throne. He believes that his knowledge of power will serve him well, and that he could be the best thing to happen to Anawir since Roll himself. None dare to gainsay him. So yeah. So again, in many ways he certainly has as good a claim as anybody else, but again, it's his I think lack of restraints in some ways, that as it says, uses and abuses of power. So it's those things that really, I think, prevent him from sort of having a more sort of popular appeal further abroad, beyond those domains that he kind of already has sort of under his boot. But that's just something that will certainly factor pretty heavily in campaigns, or should. On the lieutenant side, so he believes that a monarch cannot carry his burdens alone, so he's entrusted his lieutenants with much of the governance of the realm, basically letting them allowing him to basically pull the strings of politics in his domain and others. So they basically handle the day-to-day things, and he kind of looks at the sort of bigger picture, long-term things. So we have Darain Bailey, or Baillier, a 7th level thief and chief of the lieutenants, basically is sort of in charge of foreign affairs. She is also very good at playing the game of politics, although she has hinted that she does have some flaws. She just is good at covering them up. But again, that's something that could be fun to then try and uncover if you were opposing Avan, and a potential weak point in the armor there. Other important NPCs. So the best goldsmith in the city of Dalton, Lastier, is a half-elf who has forgotten the use of his surname. So this big bald man always proves a font of information and gossip. He makes no claim to the truth of his talk, but he seems accurate far more often than not. Though one of the most friendly, gentle people a traveler is likely to meet, he does possess an underlying sadness, and he charges a pretty price for his work. So again, that could be an interesting point of contact. And if you're not playing the sort of running a domain version of Birthright, and you're actually just adventuring, that could certainly be a great point for various plot and adventure hooks there. And could even lead you into closer contact with Aman himself if you end up sort of becoming his vassals in some way, or known or trusted adventurers that he might task you with certain things with. So that could be an easy inroad there. But also, maybe he knows more about Avan than he should, and if you were looking to potentially disparage Avan, or have something that you could hold against him, that could be played out there too. The realm itself, so like the rest of the Heartlands, the eastern provinces are covered in grasslands, so grain and cattle roam there, but not really of superior quality to other domains. The grasslands give way to the hills and mountains in the west, where the mines basically pull the various precious metals from the earth, and that's really where a lot of the wealth comes from. As it says here, sometimes at night the lurid glow of smiths casts an infernal light across the clouds. The common folk whisper that the shadow world creeps closest at those nights. And again, shadow world's a whole another thing we're going to have to get into in separate videos, but again, easy plot and adventure hooks there, along with some of the other things that we looked at when we were talking about the western coast. The capital. So, since the prince never controls the city of Anawir, the ruling family basically just decided to make the domain's capital in Dalton, in the province of the same name, at the base of the Sea Mist Mountains, so more towards the west. And then, as it says here, the main wealth of Avanil are basically from the mines. So gold, silver, and iron are pulled from the mountains and exported all over. The smiths basically work them into some of the best jewelry and weaponry produced by human hands. So, and certainly, again, there could be some easy adventure hooks related to helping out there if there were ever any threats to that portion of Avanil's prosperity. Allies. So Tagos, just to the west, has sworn fealty to Avanil. With the Count's sanction, the prince's armies march up to the border to match their might against Borroween's. Brosengay, although under Avanil's rule, is not a strong ally, and really would, as we saw with the review of Brosengay, would potentially like to sort of switch sides to Borroween, but obviously she's a little bit further away, and Borroween would have to go through Tagas, but then also deal with Avanil if ever Brosengate decided to switch sides or break away from Avanil. Enemies, though. So, as you might expect, the most powerful enemy is also his chief rival for the Iron Throne, which is Borroween. The Prince and the Archduke remain constantly at each other's throats, and no force in Anywhere is going to stop their mutual hatred. They watch the moves of the other regents, each always looking for the hand of the other so they can counteract the plots of their counterpart. Though they seem to act civilly in public, their words carry barbs apparent only to the other. Another enemy of Avan is the Imperial Chamberlain of Anywhere, Khaled Dossier. So he knows the prince and his politics, and Dossier's work playing Avan and Borroween off each other has continued to fuel their passionate hatred, and we'll get into that some more. However, the Prince of Avanil doesn't realize Dossier considers him and the Archduke both unfit. He does what he can to win the Chamberlain's favor, knowing that the man's word could make the next emperor. Fortunately enough, other kingdoms border the Elf's domain to take Row of Manslayer's attention away from Avanil some of the time, yet the abomination does present danger enough that Avan keeps a permanent garrison in the north to ward against him. So, so that's something that basically both Borroween and Avanil kind of have to deal with as a little tiny province of Row of Manslayer's domain there that, is really also preventing them from just easily, I think, just going all out and settling it once and for all. So there's kind of like the bigger evil there that stops that. But again, we'll get into more on the Imperial Chamberlain, just because that's an interesting story in and of itself when we get to that domain. And then other special considerations. So the Avanese feel cautiously devoted to their liege. They don't praise him with every word, but they do take quick offense at deprecating remarks against him. Though no law forbids speaking against the prince, someone doing so might want to leave the domain quickly, for even rogues here believe with pride that their lord is destined to become the next emperor of Anowir. So something that, again, would be fun to bring up in adventures if you find yourself in Avanil and not knowing that you should basically be wise to keep your mouth shut about Avan. So again, so much like Borroween dominating everything on the western coast, in many ways, Avanil dominates everything, not just really in the Heartlands, although some of the Heartlands do stretch up further north, so I wouldn't say he dominates all of the Heartlands, but sort of, I would say, the sort of center or core of the former empire here. If Borroween's involved in it, Avanil is going to be there to sort of counteract, and certainly anything that's nearby, Avanil is going to have some sort of influence over, whether it's direct, like with Tagas and Brosengate, or other domains that certainly want to curry favor with Avanil, and you might find yourself as one of those domains if it's a playable one. But certainly you do have to respect everything that Avanil is capable of, whether it's on the political, economic, military side, or really even on the magical side with all the sources that a sort of pet mage Harold Corian controls. There's so much here, and you'd again be wise to tread carefully with this powerful domain. But if you find yourself allying with Avanil, just realize, of course, that he's probably unless you really are like in a powerful position, he's really going to look at you more as like a sort of one more tool to sort of help him gain the imperial throne. So, and unless really that is your goal as well, just be aware of that Avanil is certainly looking at you as a valuable piece in his overall sort of portfolio of domains and other tools to help him accomplish those things. So anyway, let us know what your guys' experiences have been with Avanil in your campaigns of Birthright. Have you been adventuring in and around there? What have you been able to do? If it's been on the sort of domain ruling version of Birthright, you're playing that part of the game as well. How have you interacted with Avanil? Have you allied with him, been an enemy? What has the experience been there? How have you approached sort of dealing with all the sort of just clear strengths that Avanil possesses, and sort of trying to not fall under his sway, or at least, if you're actually going against him, how have you gone about that, and what have the consequences been there? So please let us know in the comments, guys, what your experiences have been in and around Avanil. Be happy to hear from you guys. And again, thanks so much as always for stopping by, guys. We really do appreciate it. And we will see you in the next one as we continue our review and tour through the Heartlands domains.